You know, some of the most powerful arguments in history weren't shouted from a grand stage. They were quietly written from inside a prison cell. And today, we're going to break down one of the absolute giants of persuasive writing, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham Jail. This is so much more than a letter. It's a total masterclass in logic, persuasion, and morality, famously pieced together on scraps of paper and the margins of a newspaper.
Right from the jump, the letter grabs you. King isn't writing some abstract essay, he's writing from jail. He's responding to something he just read. You can feel the urgency, you can feel the high stakes. This isn't theoretical for him. His freedom is literally on the line.
So who was he writing to? Well, it wasn't who you might expect. He's not responding to hardcore segregationists, but to 8 local, white religious leaders, men he considered colleagues. And he makes a point to address them as men of genuine goodwill, even as they're calling his life's work unwise and untimely. He wanted to answer them, as he put it, in patient and reasonable terms.
So King just jumps right in, tackling their first big criticism head-on. The question they were basically asking was, "You're not from Birmingham. What are you even doing here, stirring up trouble?" Let's see how he masterfully takes that argument apart. This was a classic move, right? A common tactic to try and discredit civil rights leaders. If you can paint them as outside agitators, you can try to convince people that the problems aren't local, that they're being manufactured by troublemakers from somewhere else. King builds his case just layer by layer. It's brilliant. He starts with the simple, undeniable facts. First off, he says, "I was invited. A local group asked him to come." Second, he's the president of the SCLC, which has a branch in Birmingham. Okay, those are the logistical reasons. But then he pivots from the practical to the profoundly moral. And boom, this is the knockout punch. He says he can't be an outsider because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. This idea that we're all connected, all part of a single garment of destiny, it just completely shatters the outsider argument. It reframes the whole thing not as meddling, but as a fundamental human duty. All right, so that brings us to their next point. The clergymen weren't just questioning why King was in Birmingham, but also what he was doing there. They didn't like the marches, the sit-ins, the direct action. They basically said, "Can't you just be patient and wait?" King responds by basically laying out their playbook, showing that protest wasn't their first choice, it was their last resort. He outlines these 4 steps. First, they collected the facts, and yep, Birmingham was one of the most segregated cities in America. Second, they tried to negotiate, but the city leaders flat out refused. Third came self-purification, workshops to prepare protesters to face violence without fighting back. And only then, when every other path was blocked, did they turn to direct action. See, the goal wasn't chaos, it was strategic. He calls it constructive nonviolent tension. The whole point was to create a crisis so undeniable, so tense that the community would finally be forced to deal with the problem it had been ignoring for so long. It was about forcing open a door that had been slammed shut. And this, right here, gets to the absolute heart of the clergyman's plea. It's not the right time, they argued. Just wait. Give the new city government a chance. Be patient. King's response to this is just devastating. He explains that for people who are oppressed, the word wait doesn't sound like a reasonable request for patience. It sounds like a denial. As he famously puts it, this wait has almost always meant never. Because justice too long delayed is justice denied. And then he just brings it right down to earth. He stops talking about philosophy and starts talking about what it feels like. He talks about having to look his 6-year-old daughter in the eye and explain why she can't go to the new amusement park because she's black. He makes you feel the human cost of waiting. Suddenly, it's not a debate about timing anymore. It's an urgent moral crisis. Okay, so this led to a really interesting question, a seeming contradiction that the clergyman pointed out. They asked, how can you tell people to obey the Supreme Court's ruling against segregation in schools, but then turn around and encourage them to break other laws, like segregation ordinances? It's a fair question, right? It seems hypocritical on the surface, and King knows it. So he doesn't shy away from it at all. He tackles it head-on with a clear, philosophical answer. He breaks it down really simply. He says, look, there are 2 kinds of laws, just laws and unjust laws. A just law lines up with moral law. It uplifts people. But an unjust law, like segregation, is out of harmony with moral law. It degrades human beings. And he gives this really powerful test. An unjust law is a law that a majority forces a minority to follow, but doesn't make binding on itself. And this is such a brilliant point. He's saying that when someone breaks an unjust law openly, lovingly and with a willingness to accept the punishment. That's not disrespect for the law. That is the absolute highest respect for law. It's an act designed to wake up the conscience of the community about the injustice of the law itself.
All right, this brings us to the final charge, and honestly, this might be the rhetorical peak of the entire letter. The clergyman called his actions extreme, and King says at first he was disappointed by that, but then, as he sat there thinking in his jail cell, he decided, you know what? I'm going to embrace that label.
Now, you have to remember, extremist was a really loaded word back then. It was meant to be a serious insult, to paint him as a dangerous radical. But just watch how he completely flips the script and turns it into a badge of honor.
He responds with this incredible series of rhetorical questions, aimed right at his fellow clergymen. He starts with the founder of their own faith. Wasn't Jesus an extremist for love? I mean, what do you say to that?
And he doesn't stop there. He reaches back to the Hebrew prophets. Wasn't Amos an extremist for justice? He is putting himself and his movement in a long, sacred line of people who spoke uncomfortable truths to power.
And then, to really seal the deal, he connects it to America's own story, to figures like Abraham Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson. By the time he's done, he has totally reframed the word. The problem isn't being an extremist. The problem is what you are an extremist for.
So after all that, after answering every single charge, King starts to wrap things up. He talks about his deep disappointment, especially with the silence of the white church. But he doesn't end on a note of despair. He ends with this powerful, unshakable vision of hope. It's this declaration of complete certainty. He's saying their victory is inevitable because their fight for freedom is woven into the very fabric of America, into the will of God itself. It's that belief that the moral arc of the universe, no matter how long it takes, bends towards justice.
And this is where he leaves us. He takes his own argument and turns it into a challenge for every single person reading. The question isn't if we'll be extremists, but what kind we're going to be. Are we going to be extremists for hate or for love, for injustice or for justice? It's a question that burned with urgency in that jail cell in 1963, and you know what? It's just as real and just as urgent for all of us today.